democracy is failing miserably at the moment, but authoritarianism isn't the answer to that. And I think America is in a lot of trouble. I do despair because I see massive idiocy around me and people getting away with things, and you go, how do they believe this nonsense? You know, Trump makes me extremely angry.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. We are on location today in the Haymarket Theatre in London, where a play called The Score is on right now, starring Brian Cox, the great film, TV and Shakespearean actor. He plays Bach, and it's a story of how Bach had a relationship with King Friedrich in which he was challenged to come up with what ended up being Bach's musical offerings. It's a fascinating play, and it's about much, much more. There are lots of ideas in there about war, about leadership, about human behaviour, and it keeps you thinking all the way through. So it's a pleasure to be here to talk to Brian. Brian Cox, how would you change the world as it is if you could do so in one sweep?
It's a huge job. I would have leaders who are sensitive and intelligent, as opposed to leaders who are delusional. And we have a few of those. And I think that our leaders are not good men. You know, I mean, some are, but there's so many that aren't. And I think America is in a lot of trouble. I mean, I could understand why they voted. I'm not sympathetic with it, but I understand why, because there's an element of that person that represents success, and America loves success. And so they make that association. But there's no virtue there. There's nothing virtuous about that man whatsoever. He's delusional. He hasn't an idea. To then turn around and call Zelensky a dictator is just appalling. And then the whole Gaza thing, which is absolute disgrace. It's a disgrace to upend all those people who have been through the most torturous time. Of course, Hamas did not help the situation right at the start. That was horrific and unforgivable, and I'm completely anti that. But the way it's gone on, and then to have him come out with, oh, well, I'll make it into a sort of, a kind of waterfront, what was it he wanted it to be, a sort of, I don't know, it was just ridiculous.
Yet he's been elected on a sort of a wave of changing the way the world is run and the kinds of people we have. And he is riding high because he's got a popular mandate. Yes. And he is elected. The world doesn't know, it seems, how to deal with him.
Well, the world doesn't really know who he is. I mean, they see something which is and again, it's all about illusion and delusion. And there's something illusory about him, but he is also deluded, clearly deluded. I mean, and what is so extraordinary is that some people can't see it. Some people believe that he is the savior in some way, and I'm just flabbergasted at how people view him.
So I'm interested in how you see it, because I think that's where you being an actor perhaps also comes in. Yeah. You have to judge characters. You have to judge characters on the page and by their actions. Or read characters rather than judge them. I mean...
Yeah, read is better than judge.
Yeah, I mean...
We don't judge, we read.
How do you see him with your skills?
Well,
perhaps others don't.
I see him in very much... almost in a reflection of our play. Terrifying father, tough time, alcoholic brother, saw his brother go down the road, and he decided he had a survival instinct, which has come to the fore. But then goes with it a profound ignorance of the human state. A profound ignorance and a block off of I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to take that. I'm going to, and he talks about the deal. This whole thing about the deal, and it's got nothing to do with human beings. It's to do with businessmen. It's not about how life is led. It's not about how communities are created. They're not created on a deal. They're created by people coming together and saying, how do we make it better? How do we improve our conditions? And he has no sense of that. No sense of that whatsoever.
Let's talk about the play then for a moment. Because the play, I think, is magnificent because it's about Bach and Friedrich, but it's actually about vastly more than that.
Absolutely.
And you're thinking about that all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. The writer, Oliver Cotton, is a very, very old friend. I mean, I've seen Oliver over the years, write more and get clarity. And then finally, when we did this play, there's changes has happened since we did it in Bath. And it's more real than it ever was. It's more true than it ever was. It's just so of them what we are, what we're doing at the moment, but told through an artist and a king who has clearly been abused and has gone on a path. And that's what's so... And ultimately, there is compassion in the play, even compassion for those who are not the good guys, Compassion, there's an element of compassion, which is Bach's compassion for Frederick. He realizes, as soon as he hears the theme, when he hears that theme, he realizes there's something deeply troubling about him, because this is something that comes out of nowhere, and he describes it as it's about regret, it's about sorrow, it's about grief, it's about so much that he doesn't know what it is.
And about the motives of the ruler, which is where you talk about sort of the motives of our leaders right now, where in the play the king tries to set Bach an impossible riddle, a musical riddle.
That's right.
For no other reason than he wants to humiliate, he wants to win, perhaps.
He wants to win. He wants to prove that he's in charge. It's all about being in charge, and we see that all the time in the States.
Do you think that's what's going on here, that this is about authority? Because some people obviously say a lot of what Trump is addressing are real problems. It is true that Europe has been freeloading off America for security. There is perhaps truth in government spending in the US, and that these are real problems that he is tackling, and that's why he's popular.
Yeah, I can see that, but he kind of misses the issue, really, I think, big time. Clearly, the world has got to a state where democracy is failing miserably at the moment, but authoritarianism isn't the answer to that. We see it all the time. People are so marginalized, and it is to do with the fact that our world is so much changing. It is to do with the fact that people don't want to live under repression, so they move to find freedom, and therefore they become migrants, and therefore they get ostracized in that way. So it's like a dog chasing its own tail. I mean, I think that's a very good analogy for the world at the moment. It's like a dog chasing its own tail.
In terms of the work you do, I mean, I guess you can do whatever you want now. You're at that stage. But do you, are you more of a truth teller now at this stage of your career than you were ever before?
Because of my background, I think I was always a truth teller, but I wasn't always in the position to tell the truth. I think I'm more in the position to tell the truth now, and I hope I'm being truthful. And that's why the theatre is very important to me. I mean, when you grow up in the tradition of the Royal Court Theatre, which was my grounding as a young actor, and you had the ideas of Osborne and, the angry young man, which changed the whole face of theatre forever. The fact that, in the old days, the working classes were all like this. It was all, in films, you see it, it's all forelock tugging. And, growing up in the 60s was an extraordinary time of liberation, when one was accepted for being who one was, not saying, oh, well, this could be better for you. Well, of course, it could always be better. But I remember coming to this city, London, when I was just 17, and it was acceptance. And the acceptance that went on in the 60s, the tolerance for things, and the excitement of what was possible in terms of ideas, and how slowly over the years it sort of drifted. And through kind of, I think, it starts, well, it goes a long way back, but the whole notion of weapons of mass destruction, which was a kind of nonsense, and just an excuse for certain people to move in Halliburton to claim oil. That's what it was all about. It's all about greed. And when greed gets in the way, then things start to get meaningless. It shouldn't be about greed. It should be about serving and embetterment of people. And it hasn't been like that for a long time.
How did you come to be a 17-year-old coming to London as an actor, given where you had come from? You'd come from a fairly working class, ordinary background.
Well, my father died when I was 8. My mother had to be institutionalized because she had a series of, not in a mental institution, it was in a nervous hospital. She had electric shock treatment, which actually destroyed a lot of her memory. And I was very much on my own. I had these 3 wonderful sisters, but they had their own families. And I don't know, the interesting thing was I didn't feel any loss. I felt the loss, of course, of my dad and what was happening to my mom, but I felt fine. I just adjusted. I just thought, oh, well, this is life. I've got to adjust accordingly. I've just got to get on with it and follow my path, And luckily enough, I knew what I wanted to do at a very early age. So
how come?
What?
Where did that come from? And when you say you knew what you wanted to do?
Well, it was a kind of, I suppose it was a sort of quasi-religious experience when I was very young. I was about 3. And we used to do, in Scotland, we have Hogmanay, which is New Year. And it's a great celebration. It's a primitive, you go what is called first footing. You go to somebody's house, you bring a caul or a piece of whiskey, you wish them best for the year. And it's a great tradition, which we did. And my dad always organized these. He had a grocer's shop. He actually did quite well. He actually made, because of his received occupation, he made 28 grand at the end of the Second World War through business.
A lot of money then.
Yeah, a lot of money,
yeah.
Which he then gave to other people to start people up in businesses. He helped them and ended up not knowing that he was going to die at the age of 51. So when he died, we found that he had only had £10 in the bank. He had these businesses which were still going, and both my brother-in-laws came to the rescue. So when we did the Hogmanay celebration, I would be woken about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I would be we had a small flat. It was 2 bedrooms and a kitchen living room with a bed alcove where my brother and I slept. And that would all be cleared out. And we had used to have about 60 or 70 people in the house. It was packed and fairly raucous and a lot of imbibing going on. But I remember when I came in at the age of 3, and I would do, it's so stupid now when I think about it. Nobody knows, actually. I would do Al Jolson impersonations without blackface.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
I didn't do blackface, but I did Al Jolson. So I would come in, and what I remember always was what happened to the room. And it's the same thing, I suppose, that happens in churches or whatever. There's a sort of, people come together with a collective consciousness, which is quite moving and quite exciting in many ways. So I thought, I felt that thing. It's a bit like Bach saying something into nothing, nothing into something. I just felt, wow, what's happened? What is it? What is this thing? Where there's a sort of equanimity with everybody. We're all together celebrating this one event. And I just thought that was so valuable, and I felt so important. And that's kind of stayed with me and supported me throughout, is what our potential is. Unfortunately, we're not living up to our potential. And unfortunately, we also have to take into account all kinds of things, like our state of evolution. This is not addressed nearly enough, is where we are as human beings. All the belief systems don't clarify any of this. It doesn't really clarify it, but there's something to be said about finding out about where we are in terms of our own evolution.
You play a very pious Christian in Bach in this play. Do you believe in anything of that?
No, I'm not. But I do believe in faith, ironically. But it's just which faith? Well, it's your own faith. And I think in Bach's case, it's, I said very clearly to Trevor, I said, I don't want to make him a holy Joe, because that would be disastrous. I don't want to be doing all this stuff, because I think that when you meet men and women of faith, there's something pure about it. There's something total about it. It's not and for a lot of people, it's quite celebratory. So, and I admire that. I've had that happen to me, with people around me. So I felt that was the important issue in the play, that Bach, yes, he's a Christian, but he's also a man of belief. as much as just a particular belief. He believes, and he also is trying to understand his own talent. Where does it come from? You know, he asks the question of the king, where does it come from? And this is the big question in the play. Where does that come from? Where are we in our state of in our state of evolution? And we're not dealing with it. We're not answering those questions. We're kind of going, oh, well, we're just a mess. Well, yeah, we are a mess. But why are we a mess?
Do you have an answer to that? I mean, because it's all kind of happened in your lifetime, hasn't it?
Yeah. It certainly has. It certainly has, yeah. I think the answer is to do with kindness, and it's to do with understanding, and to see, you know, and I've seen a lot of tragedy and lost a lot of friends over the years, and, you know, through various things. And, you know, and I miss them terribly, you know, people who were enormous influences. But then I have to understand, well, that's part of where we are. That's what happens. You can't hold on to things. What you can do is carry the idea, carry the sense of what it's given you through your life, and so that you behave in a very, you know, in the best sense of the word, a Christian way, you know. But I mean, I'm talking about Christ as opposed to Christian religion.
But we as people across the world have become very tolerant of killing.
Yeah.
Of war,
yeah.
Of tragedy.
Yeah.
I mean, in the play, there's a section about that where Friedrich sort of says, well, these things happen.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
That's just the way things are.
And I think
is that the truth?
Well, it seems to be the truth more and more. But it's also about, you know, I wouldn't mind if there was a sort of selflessness at work, of some kind of idea that we are actually trying to make the world a better place and therefore we are giving ourselves over. But it's not. It's all based on vested interest. It's, you know, for Putin, for Trump, you know, from Netanyahu, it's all vested interest. It's not about understanding the realities of the world.
What do you mean by that, by vested interest?
It's self-serving. You know, what I need, what I require, and damn you in the process. And of course we require certain things, and of course we need to open ourselves to that knowledge of what we need. But it doesn't mean to say that we have to kill people or beat people or go to war in order to achieve that. And, you know, and we do this dance. You know, we've done it over the centuries, this dance, the war dance that we kind of indulge in. And somehow I think we've got to move on. We haven't quite moved on. You know, we're still, you know, we're still in the woods as far as that's concerned.
Does your politics get you into trouble professionally at all?
Not really. I mean, I was a big Labour man, and I am a socialist in principle. I am a socialist. I just felt that that what happened with the Labour Party and what happened with Blair under, you know, falling in line with Bush and Rumsfeld and Cheney and all of that, you know, it was just a pretty horrific time. And I felt that Tony was led to sort of betray certain ideology, I think. And I felt that social democracy was failing miserably. And therefore I resorted to the fact that what I'd ignored and what a lot of especially young actors who come from the Celtic islands like Wales or Scotland or Ireland, you know, is that we are trying to find who we are within this setup of Britain, and it's tough at times. It was great in the 60s because it was more egalitarian. There was such a sense of egalitarian that we were all on the same page working towards the same end. But as time's gone on, so my disillusionment, which was not really with the Labour Party, but it was with Blair, and I always felt sorry for Gordon Brown because I felt he was on the horns of a big dilemma most of the time. But so I just lost that, and then I decided, well, where can I retread to? And I looked at my own country, and I thought, and I realized, you know, how poorly we'd been treated as the Scots, you know. And I just felt that we need to have our own sense of ourself, so that we can take part in a united kingdom. Do
you still believe in independence? Or
I believe what I believe in is a federal society. I really believe that we should have you can't look at these islands. You look at the map of these islands. We are all of the same ilk. The islands dictate that, but I just feel that we should have a kind of sense of our own self within that. which we don't have quite. And I felt that comes from being part of a federal situation where each country stands autonomously on its own, but then it comes together to talk about the world of the United Kingdom and how that should operate. And we don't do that because we're not federalists. We're, it's first past the post. It's all those values, and the struggle with, it's the irony of that Keir Hardie was a great Scotsman, but I've always thought, what would it be like for Keir Hardie now, seeing how the Labour Party has moved and where it's come from, and how it's become. It's still, for me, a good party, believe me, and I do believe that. But the problem is just understanding what our world is,
So do you see Starmer in Blair's tradition, or how do you see him?
It's very hard to know. I mean, Starmer, I feel two things about Starmer. Probably the greatest prime minister we ever had was Clement Attlee, I think. Because Attlee people...
Which is what he thinks as well, I think.
What, Starmer?
Yeah.
Well, I see elements of that. I mean, I do. There's an element of it which I'm not too cool about, but I do feel that. I do feel that he has the possibility, if he really thought about it, of being a kind of Attlee figure. I mean, Attlee ran... People go on about the war, Churchill took care of the war, but the country was run by Attlee. He ran it, and he ran it brilliantly, And it was run along socialist principles, caring for one another, making advantaging people so that they could deal with what was a pretty horrific situation during the Second World War.
So you do think he's a man of principle? You don't see him as one of these vested interest types?
No. I do think ultimately he's a man of principle. Sometimes his manner kind of puts me off, but I do think he's a man of principle deep down.
You talked about the horror of Gaza and what's been going on there. I mean, how have you viewed that over the last year and a half? Because again, this is one of those things which we in Britain have largely lived with and said, well, that's one of those things that happens.
And these things shouldn't happen. I'm sorry. I think the idea that we say, oh, well, that's okay because that happens. And I think to really understand what that remark means, we have to understand what our responsibility and what our individual responsibility is to those events.
What is it?
It's understanding what the state of the world is and realizing it's in a very bad way, and therefore, it can only come through some sort of form of care of the individual, care of the society, care of how we can progress, because we just keep treading water again and again and again. We don't move forward. And it's the moving forward that will allow us to go to the next phase. Also, the thing about Gaza, the thing that got me is the children. For those kids who live in a kind of innocence, what they've gone through in the last 3 years is horrific. And then to have that idiot turn around and say, oh, well, we'll make it a new Riviera, that's what we'll do. You go, where is your sense of humanity, man? Where is it? It isn't present. It's based on the deal. The deal isn't going to help you in this situation. It's not about a deal, it's about human beings. It's about human beings trying to live in a society and trying to create a society that will function for them. Not about a bloody deal.
I mean, he and his supporters would say, it is humanity because I'm saying you can't live in Gaza now, you have to go and live somewhere else because it's impossible to live there. What's the answer to that?
Make it better. The land is there, build the land for the people. Give it back some kind of sense of identity, and don't take it away.
So how profound do you think this moment is? I mean, is Trump right now just sort of another passing few years that can be reversed? Or do you think these are profound changes that pose a proper threat?
Yeah, they are profound changes which poses a proper threat, because it is the fact that we all... there's always the area of selfishness that we always have to deal with in our own lives. What do we do? It's like your decision. Do I take the money or do I not? And I could see you struggling last night.
On Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
On Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But it was a very interesting thing because it made me think about, and I kept saying, take it, just take it now. Don't And I could see you going, well, and I just thought, no, don't. I know. And that's where we're always caught on the horns of a kind of dilemma like that. That's a minor dilemma, but it's that thing where we lose clarity and clarity of purpose. And it's understandable. It's all too human, really.
I mean, I suppose the thing is, your industry, away from the theatre, the television and film industry, is existing in this world now, and it's become much more corporate than ever was. Do you think it is able to withstand the political forces at play in America now?
Well, I hope it does, but I think it's I think there's a lot of threat around in that situation.
And do you think that will mean some things don't get made, criticism doesn't get said?
Exactly. I mean, there is a form of censorship that will come in play. What I love coming back here, and why I think I'm so proud of what we do, what the Brits do in terms of the theatre, is that it's so deeply in our culture. You know, it's not about profit. It's about the event. You know, when we do the play and we get the reaction we get from this audience for this play, which I find incredibly moving, incredibly touching, I realize I'm in the right place. And I'm doing the right job, because we're presenting an allegory of our time, you know, in many ways, and they get it. That's the extraordinary thing. The audience get it, and it's very exciting. And it seems to me it's what the purpose of theatre is. And it's Hamlet talks about: hold the mirror up to nature, you know, show everything its own form, reflect, and that's what we do, and that's our responsibility in the theatre.
And do you think theatre is braver than the television industry as it is now?
Well, I mean, one has to be careful about generalization, because there are certain things that are really extraordinary in television. I mean, like, you know, I did a show called Succession, and that was again an allegorical show about, you know, entitlement, about all of the things that have suddenly come to root. But of course, the problem is everybody loved the show, which it may have been a good idea if they didn't love it so much because of the subject. You know what I mean? You're on the horns of a curious dilemma there, you know? Where
you take terrible characters and people start to like them.
Exactly. You know, and I think that, and I don't think it's right to sort of try and say, oh, we must always present the terrible characters terribly. We've just got to present as confused human beings, because that's what we are.
But what I mean is, like, you know, big tech, which is now part of this sort of axis in America, is also now sort of in charge of the TV and film industry. Amazon, Netflix. Apple,
exactly.
Is there a consequence to that?
Well, I think some of the work is excellent, you know, so I'm not going to kind of knock it and just say that, you know, because there's great things coming out at the same time. I just think we have to protect the independent nature of it, in a way, you know, the creative nature. That's why when I come back here, I realize that, you know, the theatre, of course, it's about money to a certain extent, but it's not the motivating force. There is something deep down which is to do with, you know, 600 years of theatre culture, you know, that we serve, that and it allows us, and we do happen to have the greatest playwright in any language, which is Shakespeare, you know, which serves us. I mean, I look at Shakespeare now and I'm dazzled by some of the ideas and how the ideas haven't changed. They're still the same questions. He asks the same questions again and again and again. And that's what the resonance is. That's why I do this job, because I love being part of that. That's what's important about me. But I'm also an entertainer. So I do want to do it through entertainment, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and you're doing a play again, aren't you, after this?
Stupidly, yes. No, not stupidly. I mean, I'm just pushing my luck. I'm not getting any younger. That's the problem.
In a way, you've talked about the 60s and how wonderful that was as a time for the creative arts.
Well, everything, you know, pop culture as well. I mean, the Beatles, of course, as well.
If theatre is to have a sort of a similar kind of period now of taking on big ideas that perhaps big corporate industry isn't prepared to, you also need to change who's in the audience, don't you? And there needs to be a democratization.
Well, absolutely. I mean,
I was here the other day and it was wonderful, but I looked around and, you know, it was an audience of a certain age.
On a matinee, it would be.
Class.
On a matinee, it would be. I mean, it's not like that in an evening show.
Right.
There's much more sort of, and also it's very important that we keep those roads for the people who can afford it.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to charge them £400 a seat, which I think would be appalling. We have to make it accessible. There are aesthetic values also that I would like to see brought into play a lot more as well. I think we have the potential to do it. I think this country has the potential to do it because it's our roots. Our theatrical roots are so deep here, and I think we have to acknowledge it. That's why I love coming back here, because I know ultimately this is going to go to people. There are going to be people sitting in the front row here who will get something, even though it's only 20 people, they'll get it,
To come back to the play again, there's something very optimistic about the play as well. In Bach's ability to triumph, his musical offering, and his faith, as you say. Are you optimistic about the world, or are you despairing?
Well, I'm an optimist, so I don't despair. I've seen despair, and it's not pleasant.
Because you sound despairing a lot, don't you?
I think I'm more questioning than despairing. I do despair because I see massive idiocy around me and people getting away with things, and you go, how do they believe this nonsense? And I do get angry when Trump makes me extremely angry. When his insensitivity, his gross insensitivity, I find just makes me really angry. So that's one thing. But I don't despair. I just think this is where we are, and this is what we've got to deal with, and we've got to make it better. It's a constant shift, change battle all the time, maintaining the standards of who we are and what life is.
Do you have a sense of how you bring kindness, compassion, empathy back into the way the world is run?
Yeah, I think that's what the theatre can do. The theatre can show that. That's why our play, I think, is a very important play, because of the allegorical nature. It's incredibly important. And I think we deal in allegory a lot, and allegory serves our purpose, because sometimes it's very hard to hit people with the real idea, but then they'll get it through that route. And they do,
You talked about entertaining people. You get a lot of laughs.
I do.
In this production.
I do.
Which is not what we normally associate you with.
Well, I've always thought people have got me wrong over the years. I've always thought I'm a natural comic. My heroes were Jerry Lewis and Bud Abbott and Lou Costello when I was a kid, I should be embarrassed to say that, but I'm not, because they gave me a lot as a child, and those childlike things I still carry with me. I carry those joys with me. I'll never forget the first time I went to the cinema. It was just, it was Captain Video. It was a sort of one of those serials that you used to go every Saturday and you get the serial. I loved it. I just loved it. I love the potential of what we could do, I didn't know that at the time, but it was something that lit me up, and I'm so grateful for it. So I am an optimist. I am an optimist because I do think I'm not alone. I think a lot of people feel the same way I feel, and feel that things could get better. But I do also despair about the idiocy, the culpable ignorance that's around us. In the Catholic Church, culpable ignorance is a sin, and when I look at Trump, I think he is a walking culpable ignorant.
But the voters also have to be held culpable, don't they? The people who put them in place.
Yeah, but also this is one of the problems we have at the moment. What we judge success by, and what is successful, and how that infects us in a certain way. And we go, oh yeah, that's great. And then you look at the animal and you think, oh, hang on, it's not quite fitting in the way I thought it would. And we're like that. We're very innocent human beings. It's also to do with where we are as in terms of our own evolution. We haven't got there. We're still working at it, So we make horrendous mistakes, and have done for centuries, and we'll probably continue to do so.
I mean, it's interesting that you're sort of hopeful about Starmer. Well, I don't know. Is hopeful the wrong word?
I will give Starmer the benefit of the doubt. It's taken me a while because I was once on a question time with him where he was a bit like that. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
I mean, one of the stories that's come out about him recently, as you may have seen, was that he had voice coaching.
I don't think that's a bad idea.
And, well, I was going to say, I mean, how do you think he is as a performer, and how would you improve him?
I think he can be more. I think he can just use more. He could use humor a bit more. You know, I think that's one of the things that he could just employ a little bit more of a sense of humor in his ideas. I mean, he's ostensibly, I think, probably a very good man. I don't know them well. You know, I've been on a couple of things with him, and we clashed. But I do think his heart is definitely in the right place. But it's difficult for him now. This couldn't be a worse time to be a politician. It couldn't be worse.
Do you think it's possible to have a good, in your terms, populist?
Well, I mean, if we look at, South Africa. Mandela. If we look at Mandela, we just see an extraordinary man who was remarkable. He was probably one of the most remarkable men that we've had in a long time. And his sense, and what he had, which was so moving, was a sense of forgiveness. He forgave. He knew what the hell he'd been through, and his country had been through, and his fellow South Africans had been through, but he was very forgiving, and therefore he was larger. He had a largeness about him and a generosity of spirit about him, which was, you know, and everybody just adored him because of the man he was, and I think that was extraordinary. So it is possible. We can have those type of people that are not based on vested interest. The only interest for him was his country and his people and getting rid of apartheid, which they did, and they did well. They have problems now because there's always that infighting that goes on. But he was a visionary, and we need visionaries. There are not enough of them.
So would your parting lesson to today's leaders with whom you're so disappointed be more Mandela?
Be more Mandela. Have a generosity of spirit about you. Be able to, you know, as how to turn the other cheek, as I think we say in the play at one point. You know, what about turning the other cheek? And of course, that's an anathema to some. But I don't think Mandela had any problem with that.
I mean, just finally, I mean, you're 78 now, is that right?
78, yeah.
I mean, do you feel your 70s have been this kind of where you've hit your peak?
Well, you know, people said to me when I was young, "Oh, it'll be the long haul from you, Brian." I just didn't realize it was going to be this long, a long haul. But it's been good because I think it's been the timing has been right. I've kept working, you know. I'm not, and I've done work which I'm very proud of, and done roles and I'm very proud, and played extraordinary people like. You know, playing Goering, for example, was an extraordinary experience because how do you make that man work? And then you find out things about his humanity, where he was, what he did when he was, you know, he was saved by two women who he actually managed to get, two Jewish ladies who he actually got out of. So there's certain element. He was a kind of complicated individual, Goering. I mean, he was also, you know, he was a great believer in Hitler. He was caught up with that, and of course that's the other thing. Those characters do, you know, they people go to them in a way because there seems to be something positive. Usually it's negative, but there seems something. There's a kind of a positive attraction about them. Yeah.
Brian Cox, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Krishnan. Nice to meet you.
Very nice to see you.